My grandmother always told stories with a softness that made the room quiet. Even when she was simply describing the weather, it felt like she was unwrapping a memory. But there was one story she only whispered, as if speaking it too loudly might cause it to disappear. It was the story of Tubabao Island in the Philippines, the place where she lived for 2 years as a refugee, the place that saved her life. As a child, I never understood the weight of those whispers. I only saw the gentle way she would touch a faded photograph of a small island surrounded by water so blue it looked unreal. I didn't realize that the Philippines wasn't just a chapter of her life. It was the chapter that allowed every chapter after that to exist. 70 years passed before she said the words, "Take me back." I didn't know what she meant at first. My grandmother rarely asked for anything, and when she did, it was always something simple: flowers, raspberry jam, more tea than she could finish. But that morning, she sat by the window with her suitcase open beside her chair, as if she had been preparing for decades. "Take me back to the Philippines," she said. "To Tubabao, one last time." Her voice didn't shake. Mine did. I knew that if a woman survived a war, survived the ocean, survived exile, and survived the silence afterward, then a trip across the world at 90 years old was not impossible. It was necessary. So I said yes. The flight to Manila was long, and my grandmother stayed awake through most of it, her eyes always fixed on the clouds. She held my hand the way she used to when I was a child. Tight, warm, protective. People stared at us because she still carried the aura of old royalty, even in her age. Her silver hair was tucked neatly behind her ear, her blue eyes sharp and aware, her posture surprisingly straight. "You look excited," I told her. "I am," she said. I never thought I would see the sky above the Philippines again. When we left, I thought the ocean would swallow us before we reached safe land. Now look. She laughed softly, the way someone laughs when they have been given back something they thought they'd lost forever. By the time we landed in Manila, the heat wrapped around us like a heavy blanket. I felt myself melting instantly, but my grandmother inhaled deeply and sighed with a kind of happiness I didn't expect. "Smells like life," she said. "It smells like 1950. People rushed past us in the arrival hall. Families, tourists, airport workers calling out passenger names. But my grandmother stood still, taking everything in. I realized then that this wasn't just a visit. It was a return. We spent a day in Manila to rest, though she didn't rest at all. She watched jeepneys pass by, studied the smiles of strangers, and listened to Tagalog conversations as if they were melodies from her childhood. "They protected us," she said. "These people, when no one else would." I had read about it. The Russian refugees fleeing Shanghai after the communists took over, finding no country willing to accept them until the Philippines opened its doors. 5,000 white Russians came to Tubabao Island from 1949 to 1951. They lived in tents. They fought storms. They waited for visas that might never come. But they survived, because the Filipinos allowed them to. The next day, we flew to Tacloban, then rode a van to a small port in Guiuan, eastern Samar, the same route described in the old documents. The air smelled of salt and rain. The water was calm, but my grandmother held her chest as if she could feel a wave from 70 years ago still touching her ribs. "This is where we arrived," she said. "Right here." There were no roads then, only the sea, the sand, and fear. We boarded a small pump boat headed for Tubabao Island. The engine sputtered to life and the boat cut through the water with gentle slaps. I expected my grandmother to close her eyes and nap. Instead, she leaned forward like a child seeing Disneyland for the first time. The closer we got to the island, the more I understood why she carried it in her heart for 7 decades. Palm trees swayed lightly in the wind, their shadows stretching across untouched sand. The huts on shore looked simple but alive, as if each one held a family that had stories older than the waves. Children were running near the shore, chasing each other with laughter so loud the wind couldn't drown it. My grandmother pressed her lips together. Her eyes glistened. "I remember the children," she whispered. "They used to bring us water in old coconut shells. They would laugh at how pale we were. We looked like ghosts." "You were only 20 then," I said. She nodded, but I felt 100. War ages you faster than time. When we stepped off the boat, I offered her my hand, but she refused. She wanted to stand on the sand by herself. The grains sank beneath her shoes, and she bent slowly, almost painfully, to touch the ground with her fingertips. She whispered something in Russian, words I didn't understand but felt deeply. Words of thanks, maybe. Words of apology. Words of home. A small group of locals approached us. They were smiling with the kind of warmth you can't teach, only inherit. A man in his 60s stepped forward. "Ma'am, welcome to Tubabao," he said. "Are you here for the Russians?" My grandmother nodded. "Yes, I was one of them." The man's eyes widened. The others whispered to each other as if a ghost from history had appeared. He placed his hand on his chest. "We have been waiting for someone like you to return." A woman brought my grandmother a chair, but she refused again. She stood straight as she looked around. "There were tents here," she said softly. "Long rows of them. We slept on wooden planks. When the storms came, we thought we would die. But the Filipinos, they gave us food, water, protection. We had nothing, but they shared everything." The man nodded. "Our elders told us stories about you. They said the Russians prayed every night for the island." My grandmother smiled. "We did, and the typhoons avoided us. They said it was because the island was protected by the Archangel Michael." The man laughed with surprise. "Yes, they still say that today." My grandmother touched her heart. "I was here when the typhoons turned away from us. Even the weather had mercy." We were invited into one of the homes. The wooden walls were decorated with photos of fiestas, fishing boats, and old portraits. A grandmother inside held our hands and said she was the granddaughter of a man who used to guard the refugee camp. "He said your people were disciplined, respectful, and always grateful," she said. "My people were broken," my grandmother replied. "You gave them dignity." While they talked, I walked outside and watched children playing along the shore. It struck me that life moved forward here untouched by the scars of war. My grandmother survived trauma in this very place, but the island carried no bitterness, only peace. When I returned inside, the local grandmother handed us a plate of suman. My grandmother held the rice cake gently, as if afraid she might break it. "I ate this 70 years ago," she said. "It was given to me by a little girl. She had nothing, but she fed me." A tear ran down her cheek. I never forgot the taste. We spent hours on the island. My grandmother walked slowly along the beach, pausing at invisible landmarks. "This was where the chapel stood," she said. "And over there was where we lined up for food. And there, that was where I learned that kindness could survive even after everything else died." I watched her from a distance. The wind lifted her hair, and the sunlight softened the wrinkles on her face. She didn't look 90 anymore. She looked 20 again, full of hope, fear, gratitude, and longing. As she walked, people began to follow her quietly, as if she were guiding them through a museum of memories. She told them stories of the refugees, how they taught Russian dance to Filipino children, how they carved statues of saints, how they learned Filipino words like salamat, kain na, tubig. The locals listened with awe. My grandmother stopped walking when she reached a small clearing beneath a coconut tree. She lowered herself slowly onto the sand and placed her hand over her heart. "This is where he proposed," she said suddenly. I froze. "Who?" "A man," she said. "A Russian soldier. He didn't survive the voyage to America. Many didn't." I sat beside her silently. "He asked me to marry him here," she said. And I said yes. But the world said no. I didn't know what to say. Her voice didn't tremble. It floated gently, like a memory carried by wind. "He was the first man I loved," she whispered. "And I buried that love here." I took her hand. She squeezed mine. "You brought me here," she whispered, "so I could pick it up again." The sun began to set, painting the island in shades of gold that made everything look sacred. My grandmother stood for one last long look. "This island saved me," she said. "It gave me food, safety, love, and a future. Without the Philippines, I would not be alive. You would not be alive." I felt my throat tighten. "Let's stay a little longer," I said. She shook her head. "No. Part of returning is knowing when to leave again." But before we left, the local man handed her a seashell. "This is from Tubabao," he said. "So it can go home with you." My grandmother held it like a treasure. "This," she whispered, "is my whole story." As the boat took us back toward Guiwan, I watched the island shrink into the distance until it became only a line on the horizon. My grandmother didn't look away, not once. Her eyes stayed fixed on Tubabao until the darkness swallowed it completely. Only then did she speak. "I am ready," she said. "For what?" I asked. "For the rest of the story." The boat ride back to Guiwan was quiet except for the gentle thumping of the small engine and the water folding behind us. My grandmother sat beside me holding the seashell the locals gave her, turning it slowly between her fingers. Her eyes stayed on the dark horizon where Tubabao had disappeared, but I could tell she wasn't looking at the present. She was looking at 1950. The night felt thick, like the air was heavy with everything she had remembered today. I waited for her to speak, because I knew she would eventually. My grandmother didn't like silence when her heart was full. "You know," she finally whispered, "I thought I was coming back to see how much I had forgotten, but I remembered everything." I rested my head on her shoulder. "I'm glad you came back." She smiled faintly. "I'm glad you came with me. You remind me of the girl I used to be." I laughed softly. "Strong?" "And stubborn," she added. "Very stubborn." When we reached the shore and stepped off the boat, a warm drizzle fell from the sky. The locals helped my grandmother walk across the wet sand. They treated her like royalty, not because she was foreign, not because she was old, but because her story was part of their island's story. A young mother approached us. She was carrying a toddler who stared at my grandmother with wide, curious eyes. "My Lola told me Russians prayed for us," the woman said. "She said the storms avoided Tubabao because the angels heard your prayers." My grandmother touched the little boy's cheek. "Then we must have prayed very loudly," she said. Everyone laughed softly. We reached our van, and as we began the long drive back to Tacloban for the night, my grandmother leaned against the window. The countryside rolled past, dark silhouettes of coconut trees, distant lamps from houses, roads so quiet they looked asleep. "It's still beautiful," she murmured, "even after all this time." I held the seashell for her while she rested. I never realized a simple shell could feel so heavy in the palm, like a piece of a universe she had locked away for 70 years. The next morning, before sunrise, I found my grandmother sitting outside the hotel on a wooden bench facing the sea. The light had not fully woken, and the world felt blue and gentle. She was wrapped in a thin shawl, her silver hair glowing with the early light. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked. "I didn't want to," she replied. "I want to feel everything." She took my hand. "This country gave me more than shelter," she said. "It gave me hope when I believed hope was a luxury reserved for other people. I was starving, alone, and terrified. Then Filipinos, people who had less than we did, fed us, protected us, treated us like human beings." She paused and breathed deeply. "I want you to understand this. Gratitude is not something you keep. It is something you give." I nodded slowly, the weight of her words pushing into me. By noon, we were back in Manila. The city was loud, alive, and warm, a whirlwind of cars, sirens, music, laughter, and chaos that somehow made sense only to those who lived here. My grandmother's face softened every time a jeepney passed us. She looked at the colors, the decorations, the faces hanging out the sides, and she smiled like she was watching children play. "So much life," she whispered. "Russia is beautiful, but the Philippines, it breathes differently." We stayed in a small hotel in Ermita, close to the bay. My grandmother insisted on walking a little despite her age. She held my arm, her steps slow but determined. As we crossed a street, a group of students passed us and smiled politely. My grandmother lit up at their friendliness. "Filipinos smile with their whole faces," she whispered to me. "We Russians are too serious. We smile only when we mean it." Here they smile because they want you to feel welcome. We ate dinner at a small family restaurant. The owner, upon hearing my grandmother's story, brought out extra dishes on the house, insisting she try kare-kare, adobo, and leche flan. My grandmother laughed after tasting the dessert. "This should be illegal," she said. "It's too good." Everyone laughed with her. When we returned to our hotel room that night, I found my grandmother sitting at the desk with the seashell again. She was staring at it with a strange expression, a mix of wonder and sorrow. "Babushka," I said, "are you all right?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she opened her wallet and took out an old envelope, yellowed and fragile. I had seen it only once before, a letter she never allowed anyone to read. "This belonged to him," she said. "The soldier I told you about." She handed it to me. I held it carefully. The paper felt brittle, like it might crumble if I breathed too hard. "Read it," she said. My heart beat faster. I unfolded it slowly. It was written in Russian. The handwriting was sharp but elegant. I translated out loud. "My dearest Anna, if fate is kind, we will reach America together. But if fate is the same cruel force it has always been, know this. You are the part of my life I cherish most. If I do not survive, promise me something. Promise me you will return to the island someday. Not for me, but for the kindness we were given there. Do not let the world forget this place." My voice cracked. I couldn't continue. My grandmother placed her hand over the letter. "He died 2 weeks after giving this to me," she said. "I was 20. I could not cry for months." I held her as she breathed shakily. "Now," she whispered, "I have fulfilled his wish." We sat in silence. The city noise faded beneath the weight of her memory. The next morning, something unexpected happened. My grandmother received a message, an email actually, from a university professor in eastern Samar. Someone had told him about her visit. He invited us to speak at a small community event honoring the history of Russian refugees on the island. My grandmother looked at me, stunned. "They want to hear our story," she said. "After all these years." I nodded. "Let's go." 2 days later, we were in a modest community hall in Guiwan. Students, teachers, local families, and even elderly folks who remembered stories from their own grandparents filled the room. When my grandmother entered, everyone stood. She was confused at first. Then she placed her hand over her chest. "I do not deserve this," she whispered. But she did. And more. As she walked toward the front, a young girl approached her holding a bouquet of sampaguita. "For you, Lola Anna," she said shyly. My grandmother's eyes filled with tears. When she spoke before the crowd, her voice had the clarity of someone who had carried their story in silence for too long. "You do not know me," she began, "but I owe all of you my life." You could hear breathing. That was all. No one whispered. No one moved. My grandmother continued, her voice steady and warm. "In 1949, the world closed its doors to us, but the Philippines opened its heart. We arrived sick, starving, afraid. Your grandparents fed us. Your grandparents protected us. Your grandparents taught us that kindness can survive even when everything else is destroyed." Some people wiped their eyes. "You did not know my name," she added. "But your kindness is the reason my children were born. The reason she gestured to me, is alive. You saved not only my life, but generations of my family." The room fell into a silence so deep, it felt sacred. Then a man from the audience stood. He was trembling slightly. "My grandfather guarded the Russian camp," he said. "He said the Russians prayed every night. He said they blessed the island." My grandmother nodded. "We did. We owed you our gratitude." After the event, dozens of people came to speak with her. They told her the stories passed down from their elders. Stories of Russian dancers, Russian prayers, Russian children playing with Filipino children, Russian doctors helping local families, Russian craftsmen carving statues for the churches. My grandmother listened to each one reverently, as if receiving pieces of her past she thought had been lost forever. By sunset, she was exhausted, but in a beautiful way. The kind of exhaustion that comes from laying down heavy memories you've carried too long. On our final day in the Philippines, we walked along Manila Bay. The sky was orange and pink, and the waves glowed with reflected light. My grandmother held my arm and moved slowly. "This is my last journey," she whispered. "I feel it." I swallowed hard. "Don't say that." "It's true," she said gently. "But I'm not sad. I have lived long enough to return to where I was reborn." We sat on a bench. People jogged, walked, laughed, ate street food. Life moved around us like a soft river. "Do you know that I almost never told you this story?" she asked. "Why?" "Because I didn't want you to see me as a victim," she said. "I wanted you to see me as a woman who survived. But now I understand something." She turned to me. "Stories don't belong to the people who lived them. They belong to the people who need them." I felt something warm bloom in my chest. She held my hands tightly. "You must tell this story," she said, "about the island, the kindness, the boy I loved, and the people who saved us. Promise me." "I promise," I whispered. The next morning, as we boarded our flight back to Russia, my grandmother looked out at the Manila skyline one last time. She kissed the seashell and held it against her heart. "Goodbye," she whispered softly. "And thank you." That night, somewhere above the clouds, she fell asleep holding my hand. Her breathing was slow, peaceful, like someone who had finally placed every memory in its rightful place. She never woke up. But she didn't leave in sadness. She left fulfilled, her story complete, her promise kept, her heart back where it belonged. When we landed, I sat alone with her shell, her letter, and everything she passed on to me. And I knew exactly what I needed to do. I would tell her story. I would honor Tubabao Island. I would honor the Filipinos who saved her. I would honor the love she lost and the life she gained. Because she was right. Stories do not belong to those who lived them. They belong to those who carry them forward. And I would carry hers, not as a burden, but as a gift.